only seniors should watch this video. At first glance, this phrase may sound restrictive, perhaps even provocative to some. But for those who have already crossed decades, faced silent losses, experienced great loves and painful goodbyes, for those who carry in their eyes the marks of time and in their souls the lessons that only life delivers, this phrase makes perfect sense. This is not just a video. It is a mirror for those who have lived long enough to know that not all love is worth the price of one's own dignity. It's a story that reveals something profound, the fine line between the desire to be loved and the risk of losing ourselves, trying to please someone who doesn't see our true value. If you've ever felt your heart beating fast even after 60, if you've ever wondered if it's still possible to start over, or if you have doubts about the place of love and self-esteem in maturity, then this video was made especially for you. Get ready to dive into a real, raw, and at the same time transformative story, where each word carries the power of experience, and each lesson can change the way you see yourself in the mirror. Stay with me until the end, because maybe you'll discover that it's never too late to rescue the most important love of all, self-love. The story I'm going to tell is about an elderly man who, in search of a new meaning in life, became involved with a much younger woman. He was enchanted, fascinated by her energy and brilliance. She was 20 years younger, full of vitality, a beauty he thought he would never find again. Little did he know that this glow held a shadow that only he, over time, would see. From the beginning, he knew this relationship wouldn't be easy. Friends commented, children criticized, and deep down, he himself had his doubts. But his heart, at 70, was still beating vigorously, and he wanted to prove to himself that he was capable of winning and keeping a young woman. Over time, what was hesitation turned into an obsession for him. He wanted to do his best, as if this were the last romance of his life. She made him feel young again, but the price of this feeling was high, and he would only discover it later. In the beginning, everything was almost perfect. She surrounded him with sweet words, praise, and affection. He felt strong, virile, reliving a youth he believed to be distant. She knew exactly how to attract him, and he gave in to her every look, every gesture. He did everything to please her, treating her like a queen. But what he didn't realize was that, little by little, she began to impose small demands, always with that air of superiority that he, at first, interpreted as mere charm. As the months went by, the changes in her behavior intensified. Small humiliations disguised as subtle comments began to emerge. She said he needed to take better care of himself, that men his age shouldn't have so many physical limitations. At first, he tried to laugh, thinking it was just a joke. But the frequency increased and the laughter began to take its toll. For with each joke, she seemed to remind him that he was too old for her. The last straw was the moment when the subject of her performance in bed became the center of her criticism. He, who always believed he could offer affection and emotional satisfaction, was confronted by cruel and direct comments. She said he was slow, predictable, that he wasn't able to satisfy her like a younger man would. He tried to argue, trying to convince her that age didn't limit the ability to make someone happy. But her words were too sharp to ignore. He remembered then the power he had in his hands, or rather, in his mouth. He told her that even though he didn't have the strength of youth, he knew how to please her, and that he could do this in a special, unique way, through oral sex. He said it with a sincerity and confidence that few younger men could have. But instead of valuing him, she treated him with disdain, mocking the desperate attempt of an old man trying to be useful. This mockery gnawed at his heart. He felt humiliated, but at the same time he tried to convince himself that this was all a test of patience and resilience. He believed that if he was understanding, she would realize his value and dedication. But in reality, her every word pushed him further into a zone of devaluation, where he saw himself as an insignificant, worthless man to a young woman. For anyone watching this story, it may seem easy to criticize his decision to stay. But anyone who has lived a long time knows that love, even in its most painful form, binds, chains, and sometimes makes us accept things that we would never tolerate in other times. He was no longer just trapped by her youth, but also by the illusion that it was possible to prove himself, somehow, to someone who seemed incapable of seeing beyond his age. One night, after a confrontation where she made him feel even smaller, he made a decision. He looked in the mirror and saw a 70-year-old man with marks of time on his face and the weight of experience in his eyes. He realized that self-love needed to speak louder, that he could no longer live in the shadow of the approval of someone who would never accept him as he really was. He then decided to calmly confront her. He explained that he was willing to give up that relationship, that, as much as he loved her, he could not continue to be humiliated. She looked at him in surprise, as if she hadn't expected him to have the courage to do this. He, at that moment, regained part of the dignity that had been lost in each of the criticisms she made. The conversation was painful but liberating. He felt like he was finally acting his age, not in a sense of weakness but of wisdom. He remembered all the years he had lived, the experiences he carried, and the value he still had, regardless of how many wrinkles or how many years he accumulated. As he left her house, he felt a relief he hadn't felt in months. He realized that sometimes we have to accept that not everyone will understand the value we carry, especially those who only see the superficial. He realized that by submitting to humiliation, he had lost himself. But in freeing himself, he regained not only self-respect, but also the serenity of a love that only he could give to himself. It was not easy to face the days that came. Loneliness came back to haunt him, but it was a dignified, clean solitude, free from the burden of needing to prove something to someone. He knew that, even without her presence, he was still the same man of value, someone who carried within him the true essence of what it means to love. This self-love was the basis for him to move forward. Experience taught him that not all youth is worth sacrificing dignity, and that true love is one that welcomes, respects, and values, regardless of physical limitations or age. Months later, he found other pleasures in life. He met old friends, traveled to places he had long wanted to visit, and rediscovered hobbies he had abandoned. He realized that his worth did not depend on validation from a younger woman, but rather on the peace he found in looking at himself. Every wrinkle on his face was a story. Every strand of gray hair represented a memory. He accepted that aging brings with it the wisdom of knowing what is really important. He no longer needed to sacrifice himself to please someone else. On the contrary, he was more focused on pleasing himself. For those who are in old age and face similar doubts, this story serves as a reminder. The search for love is legitimate, but it should never come at the cost of inner peace. Lessons come with time, and only those who have lived a long time know how valuable it is to preserve dignity, even in the face of the illusory promises of youth. Looking back, he realized that that relationship was a profound learning experience. It was a lesson in acceptance and the need to maintain one's values above all criticism. He realized that, to be loved, he needed to first love himself in all his fullness, with all his limitations and virtues. The decision to leave the relationship was, for him, a reconquest of himself. And for many who watch this story, Perhaps it is an example of how essential self-love is, even when everything around us seems to conspire to take away our confidence. Only seniors should watch this video, because only those who have lived a long time know how priceless dignity is. He learned that a man's value is not measured by his age, but by the integrity with which he faces adversity. And it is this integrity that turns every wrinkle into a trophy of wisdom. Now, based on this story, I will share 5 well-developed lessons for those who are older and face the challenges of a relationship. The first lesson is that, as charming as it is to relive the glow of youth alongside someone younger, it is essential to keep your feet on the ground and not get lost in this illusion. Just like the character, many end up giving their time and energy to someone who, deep down, doesn't value who they really are. The desire to prove that we still have vigor and capacity can become a trap, leading us to accept humiliations that we would never tolerate in other phases of life. Love should not be a testing ground, but rather a space of respect and mutual acceptance. The second lesson this story teaches us is about the importance of self-love. In his case, accepting cruel comments about his performance and his age was like giving up a part of himself. He thought that enduring this criticism in the name of love was an act of nobility, but in reality, he was losing his dignity. Loving yourself is a commitment that must come before any relationship, because when we forget our own value, we become vulnerable to the contempt of others. Recognizing that we are worthy of respect and affection is the foundation for any healthy relationship. The third lesson is the courage to say enough is enough and see loneliness, even if temporary, as a form of peace. When he decided to leave that relationship, it wasn't just a breakup, it was a reclaiming of himself. He chose the most difficult path, but also the most dignified, by choosing to be alone rather than continue to be humiliated. Sometimes loneliness is a refuge to reorganize our self-esteem, not a punishment. In fact, he gave himself the chance to rebuild his inner peace, something no one could take away from him. The fourth lesson is that, in old age, our experiences and memories become true treasures, and those who don't see this are simply trapped in superficiality. The wrinkles, the gray hairs, each sign of time brings a story, a lesson. He realized that he didn't need to mold himself to the ideal of a perfect youth, because what he had was much deeper. Those who live in search of the superficial will never understand the value of wisdom acquired over time. And therefore, it's not worth trying hard to please someone who doesn't understand the essence of who we really are. The fifth lesson is that men who pay attention to their partner's pleasure, including oral sex, are often those who are more generous and careful in relationships. He believed that, despite no longer having the physical vigor of his youth, he could demonstrate his affection and desire for her in other ways, proving that pleasure in a relationship is not limited to physical performance alone. This gesture of affection and dedication often reveals a man willing to put his partner's needs above his own pride. However, respect must be a two-way street. Offering pleasure is an expression of affection, but it should not be turned into an obligation or a reason for humiliation. In this case, he learned that, as much as he was willing to do his best to please her, it was essential that this gesture was valued. The lesson he takes is that true intimacy must be surrounded by respect and consideration, not judgment or criticism. If this story touched your heart, and you believe that these lessons can make a difference in someone's life, subscribe to the channel now. This helps us continue to bring you stories that inspire, heal, and transform. Like the video, and share this message with friends, family, or anyone who is facing the challenges of age, or a relationship that weakens rather than strengthens. You can be a conduit for change in someone's life simply by spreading a message like this. A message about the value of dignity, the power of self-love, and the wisdom of those who have lived long enough to understand what really matters. Until the next video.